Go on, grab the coffee, Grandma, and try not to spill it. Colonel Thorne's dismissive command ignited a wave of snickering across the opulent conference hall. Evelyn Reed, 65 and dressed in a simple tweed jacket, moved with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place among the sea of polished brass and hungry ambition. She was forced to carry the heavy silver coffee pot like a hired servant, enduring their silent judgment. But as she placed a cup before an old general, her collar shifted, until he shot to his feet, whispering 2 words. Before I tell you the 2 words that silenced the entire room, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The room was paneled in dark oak, smelling faintly of expensive cigars and unchallenged authority. The air in the Carlisle conference room was thick enough to taste. A stale cocktail of self-importance and recycled air. Sunlight struggled through the tall, arched windows, catching dust motes dancing in the beams, illuminating the faces of the nation's next generation of military leaders. They were all sharp jawlines, crisp uniforms, and the kind of restless energy that comes from believing you are the smartest person in any room you enter. And then there was Evelyn. Her silver-white hair was swept into a neat, functional bun, and the lines etched around her calm, blue eyes spoke of wisdom, not weariness. Her simple wool jacket and slacks were clean and pressed, but in this room of decorated peacocks, she might as well have been invisible. Colonel Marcus Thorne, a man whose ambition was as sharp and polished as the medals on his chest, certainly saw her that way. He leaned back, his chair groaning in protest, and gestured with a flick of his wrist. The generals need a refill. Get to it. He didn't use her name. He didn't even make eye contact. To him, she was a function, a piece of the furniture. The snickers that followed were quiet but sharp, like the rustle of dry leaves. Major Isabella Vance, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe, weaponized bun, added her own venomous honey to the pot. "Do be careful with that pot, ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "We wouldn't want you to strain yourself." Evelyn didn't respond. She simply picked up the heavy, ornate silver pot. The weight was familiar, grounding. She moved between the tables with a steady, unhurried grace that belied her age. The officers either ignored her completely, deep in conversations about drone strike capabilities and budget allocations, or they watched her with a mixture of pity and contempt. "How did she even get in here?" a young captain muttered to his neighbor, loud enough for her to hear. "Must be some general's distant aunt, brought in for charity." The neighbor, a lieutenant with eager eyes, snickered. Maybe they finally realized what women are best suited for in the army. The words were meant to be barbs, to sting and humiliate. And perhaps they would have on someone else. But Evelyn felt only a profound sense of disappointment. It was a noise she had heard her entire life, in different forms, in different rooms, spoken in different languages. It was the static of ignorance. As she poured a stream of dark, rich coffee into a general's cup, her fingers brushed against the worn leather strap of her old wristwatch. For a fraction of a second, the polished oak walls dissolved. She was somewhere else, under a merciless sun, the air thick with dust and the echoing shouts of young men. The memory was gone as quickly as it came, leaving no trace on her serene expression. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a fortress built over decades, brick by brick, under fires they couldn't possibly imagine. As she moved toward the far side of the room, a cocky young lieutenant, emboldened by the pack mentality, subtly stuck his polished black shoe into her path. It was a petty, childish act of malice, designed to make her stumble and spill the coffee, completing her public humiliation. He watched her approach, a smirk playing on his lips. But Evelyn didn't stumble. She didn't even appear to notice. With a barely perceptible shift in her gait, her foot came down inches from his, her balance utterly undisturbed. She continued on her way as if he didn't exist. The lieutenant's smirk vanished, replaced by a flush of red that crept up his neck. A few of the older, quieter officers at the back of the room exchanged glances. For the first time, they saw not an old woman, but a flicker of something else. Something immovable and deeply formidable. The laughter in the room began to quiet. replaced by a less certain murmur. The subtle shift in the room's atmosphere was lost on Thorne and Vance, who were too engrossed in their own performance. The main event was about to begin. A presentation by the venerable 4-star General Alistair Finch, a man whose career spanned from the jungles of Vietnam to the command centers of the digital age. He was a living legend, and the room held him in a mixture of awe and fear. Evelyn moved to his place at the head of the table, the last one to be served. As she leaned forward to place the delicate porcelain cup on its saucer, the collar of her tweed jacket caught on the back of the chair and pulled aside for a mere second. Beneath it, pinned discreetly to the simple white blouse she wore underneath, was a small piece of metal. It caught the light, a flash of silver against the white fabric. It was a silver star. General Finch, who had been reviewing his notes, looked up. His eyes, accustomed to scanning battlefields and geopolitical maps, were preternaturally sharp. They locked onto the metal. His entire body went still. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the lingering chatter. "Forgive my forwardness, but that metal on your blouse." Before he could finish, Colonel Thorne let out a short, derisive laugh. "Oh, don't be fooled, General. It's a touching sentiment, but I'm sure she picked it up at a pawn shop. Probably belonged to her late husband." He winked at the officers around him, inviting them to share in the joke. A sweet, if slightly confused, tribute. The room chuckled, eager to follow Thorne's lead. But Evelyn did something no one expected. She straightened up, set the coffee pot down on a nearby credenza with a soft click, and turned to face Colonel Thorne directly. For the first time, she spoke, and her voice, though quiet, resonated with an undeniable authority that silenced the room instantly. She didn't address the insult. She didn't defend herself. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes and asked a simple question. "Colonel," she said, her voice as calm and clear as a winter morning, "have you ever smelled cordite? Not on a firing range. I mean in the air, thick like fog, when your comrade is bleeding out in the dust next to you." The silence that followed was absolute. Thorne's smug expression faltered. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The question hung in the air, a stark and brutal image that none of the polished strategies or theoretical warfare discussions could erase. While the room was still reeling, a secondary, unintentional drama unfolded. A young aide, a nervous private first class, barely out his teens, was rushing to distribute classified folders to the generals. Flustered and trying to navigate the crowded space, he stumbled, bumping hard into Evelyn and sending a sheaf of papers scattering across the floor. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry, ma'am," he stammered, his face bright red as he dropped to his knees to gather the documents. As he looked up to apologize again, his eyes fell on Evelyn's sleeve, which had ridden up slightly from the impact. There, on her wrist, was not a bracelet, but a faded, well-worn unit patch sewn onto the lining of her jacket. It depicted a spectral figure with 2 crossed rifles. The aide froze, the papers forgotten in his hands. His face went from red to ghostly white. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice trembling. That's the insignia for the Ghost Unit, from the Zabul Valley operations." He swallowed hard, his eyes wide with a dawning, incredulous awe. My uncle was on it first. His convoy was ambushed there. He said they were saved by a woman from the ghosts. They called her the Angel of the Valley." The aide's trembling words dropped into the silent room like a depth charge. Angel of the Valley. The name was a legend, a piece of battlefield folklore whispered in barracks and training fields. A story of a lone operative who had single-handedly turned the tide of a doomed engagement. Most thought it was just that, a story. General Finch's face was now a mask of granite. The pieces were clicking into place. He looked from the silver star on Evelyn's chest to the ghost unit patch on her sleeve, and then to her calm, unreadable face. He knew. He ignored Colonel Thorne, who was now sputtering, trying to regain control. Instead, Finch turned to his own aide. "Major, connect my secure tablet to the main screen. Access file, Delta 79er. Declassification code, Finch Alpha 0. The Major, sensing the seismic shift in the room, moved with swift efficiency. The massive screen at the front of the room, which moments before had displayed a PowerPoint on logistical strategies, flickered to life. A stark, black-and-white header appeared, classified. After-action report, Operation Stone Viper. Below it, in bold red letters, Zabul Valley ambush. A grainy, black-and-white video began to play. It was drone footage, time-stamped over a decade ago. The scene was chaos, a narrow, dusty valley, American Humvees burning, and the unmistakable muzzle flashes of a well-entrenched enemy. Then, a single figure emerged from the smoke. Dressed in combat gear, the soldier was smaller than the others, moving with a fluid, terrifying grace. The drone camera zoomed in. The figure was a woman. For the next 3 minutes, the silent, ghostly footage held the entire room captive. They watched as the young Evelyn Reed, her face grim with determination, laid down a terrifyingly accurate field of suppressive fire. They watched her dash across open ground, a death sentence for anyone else, to drag a wounded soldier behind the meager cover of a rock outcropping. They watched her do it again. The final shot was a close-up, her face smudged with dirt and gunpowder, as she knelt over a fallen comrade, her hands working deftly to apply a tourniquet, her eyes scanning the ridges for the next threat. She was not an angel. She was a warrior. A collective gasp went through the room. Colonel Thorne's face had drained of all color, leaving a pasty, gray mask of horror. Major Vance, who had built her career on sharp-witted cynicism, stared at the screen, her knuckles white where she gripped the table. The young lieutenant who had tried to trip Evelyn now looked physically ill, his face buried in his hands. The silence was broken by a chair scraping loudly against the floor. Brigadier General Matheson, a grizzled, barrel-chested man who rarely spoke, stood up. His voice was thick with emotion. "I was the watch commander at Buckram that day," he said, his eyes fixed on the frozen image of Evelyn on the screen. "I saw this happen in real time. We all thought she was a ghost. A phantom. We lost contact. We thought she was KIA. He turned, his gaze finding Evelyn in the crowd. "My God," he whispered. "It was you. You were the angel." But General Finch wasn't finished. The video faded, replaced by a scanned document. A commendation for the Medal of Honor, signed by Matheson himself. And next to it, another document. A formal request for the commendation to be downgraded and buried, citing insufficient evidence. It was signed by the theater's ambitious young logistics officer. General Finch let the image sink in before his voice, cold as a blade, cut through the stunned silence. He pointed a finger not at the screen, but directly at a trembling Colonel Thorne. "And you, Colonel Thorne, were that logistics officer. 3 years ago, when your promotion was being reviewed, you personally misplaced Colonel Reed's entire service record to ensure this story never surfaced. All because her legitimate heroism would have overshadowed your fabricated reports of supply line efficiency. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Thorne didn't even try to defend himself. Military police were at the door within minutes, their presence a quiet, final judgment. He was escorted out, his career not just over, but erased. Major Vance sat frozen, a deer in the headlights of a truth she couldn't outrun. Her own complicity in burying Evelyn's file, in hopes of gaining Thorne's favor, would come out in the investigation. Her meticulously crafted career was already in ashes. The other officers who had mocked and jeered now either stared at their shoes in shame or tried to become invisible. Some approached Evelyn, stammering apologies, but she simply looked past them, her expression betraying nothing. Her victory felt hollow, a ghost of a vindication she had never sought. She showed no triumph, no "I told you" satisfaction. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the world outside that kept turning, oblivious to the small drama of egos that had just played out. She walked over to the young aide, the one who had recognized her patch. "Your uncle," she said softly. "What was his name?" The boy, still shaken, told her. Evelyn nodded. "Sergeant Miller. I remember him. A good man. He talked about his sister's boy back home. Tell him I'm glad he made it." This quiet act of humanity, this focus on the soldier and not the glory, was a more powerful statement than any medal. But the whispers, though changed in tone, didn't stop. In the days that followed, a new narrative formed among the disgraced officer's allies. She was a hero, yes, but that was long ago. A fluke. No one, especially not a woman her age, could possess that kind of skill anymore. The challenge came from Vance, a last, desperate snarl before she was formally charged. They say she's a legend with a rifle, she sneered to a journalist. Let's see the legend prove it. The challenge was absurd, but it took on a life of its own. The base command, wanting to put the matter to rest, arranged a demonstration at the long-range facility. Evelyn stood on the firing line, the hot sun beating down. Before her lay a Barrett M82, a monster of a rifle. 1,000 meters away, a standard bullseye target shimmered in the heat. A crowd of officers had gathered, their faces a mixture of skepticism and morbid curiosity. General Finch stood beside her. "Evelyn, you don't have to do this," he said quietly. She didn't answer. She simply lay down on the mat, her movements fluid and practiced. The rifle settled into her shoulder as if it were an extension of her own body. She didn't use the advanced digital scope. She didn't consult the wind charts held by an eager young sergeant. Instead, she closed her eyes. For a long moment, she was still. The crowd grew restless. Then her eyes opened. They were not the eyes of a 65-year-old woman. They were the eyes of a predator, calm, focused, and absolute. She took a single, slow breath, exhaled halfway, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's roar was a physical blow, a thunderclap that rolled across the field. 1,000 meters away, the target didn't just get a hole in it. The bullet struck dead center with such kinetic force that it vaporized the bullseye and shattered the thick wooden post holding the target upright, sending splinters flying. A collective, involuntary gasp swept through the crowd, followed by a stunned, heavy silence. Then, the applause started, a single clap, then another, until it became a deafening roar. Evelyn slowly got to her feet, her face serene. She hadn't proven them wrong. She had simply shown them who she had been all along. Evelyn's story is a powerful reminder that true honor isn't found in polished medals or the applause of crowd, but is forged in the silent crucible of character. In a world obsessed with appearances and first impressions, the greatest strength often lies hidden behind a quiet demeanor. It proves that courage, skill, and profound greatness are timeless. They belong to no single age, gender, or rank, and they require no one's permission to exist. Have you ever been judged solely on your appearance, before you even had a chance to show who you truly are? What would you have done if you were in Evelyn's shoes, facing that room of doubters and their cascade of insults? Do you think our society often overlooks the immense wisdom and strength of its elders, mistakenly viewing them as relics from the past instead of invaluable resources for the present and future? If this story opened your eyes to the quiet heroes living among us, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about true strength and hidden valor. Share this with someone who knows that real respect is earned through action, not demanded by rank. We read every single comment and value your perspective. More stories about forgotten heroes and dramatic moments when the truth finally comes to light are waiting for you on your screen. Watch those next. And we'll see you tomorrow with an incredible story about a high school janitor who quietly outsmarted a corrupt CEO and saved the entire school district.